My parents forbade me to enroll in a prestigious university so as not to offend my brother, who couldn't even properly finish high school. So now they think I am studying at a local college, while in reality, I am already finishing university in another state. Look, I'm not going to lie to you folks. This story is going to sound pretty messed up, but it's 100% true. My name's Michael, I'm 25, and I need to get this off my chest because, honestly, it's been eating at me for years. So, picture this. Typical American suburban family. White picket fence, 2-car garage, the whole 9 yards. Looks perfect from the outside, right? Wrong. Dead wrong. See, in my family, there was always this unspoken rule that my younger brother John was basically untouchable. The golden child. The chosen one. Whatever you want to call it. I'm talking about a kid who could literally burn the house down, and my parents would find a way to blame the matches. Meanwhile, I could cure cancer, and they'd ask why I didn't do it faster. It was that level of favoritism, and trust me, growing up in that environment really messes with your head. John was 2 years younger than me, but you'd think he was the older brother by the way my parents treated him. This guy failed his driving test 3 times. 3 times. And instead of making him practice more, my dad bought him a brand new Honda Civic as a consolation prize. Me? I had to work 3 part-time jobs just to afford a beat-up 2001 Toyota Camry with more miles on it than a space shuttle. But here's where it gets really wild. When John was a junior in high school, he decided he wanted to be an entrepreneur. Sounds noble, right? Well, this genius convinced my parents to loan him $5,000 to start some ridiculous business selling custom phone cases online. $5,000. That's more than my parents spent on my entire high school education combined. Of course, the business flopped harder than a fish on dry land. John spent most of the money on video games and junk food, made maybe 12 phone cases total, and sold exactly 0. When my parents found out, did they ground him, make him get a job to pay them back? Nope. They just laughed it off and said he was learning valuable life lessons about business. Meanwhile, when I asked for help with my college application fees, we're talking like $200 total. They told me I needed to learn responsibility and figure out myself. The double standard was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. High school was basically 4 years of watching John get away with murder, while I busted my tail trying to get any recognition at all. I played varsity soccer, maintained a 3.8 GPA, volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends, and worked at McDonald's to save up for college. John barely scraped by with C's and spent most of his time playing Call of Duty in the basement. But guess whose achievements got talked about at family dinners? That's right. John's participation trophy from his 1 semester of JV baseball got more attention than my academic scholarship offers. It was like living in some twisted alternate reality, where up was down and down was up. The breaking point came during my senior year. I had been accepted to several good colleges and was trying to decide between them. My parents' advice? Pick the cheapest one, so they'd have more money to help John when his time came. Not kidding. They literally told me to downgrade my future, so my brother could have better options later. That's when I realized something that probably should have been obvious years earlier. I was never going to be good enough for them. It didn't matter what I accomplished, how hard I worked, or how much I sacrificed. In their eyes, I was just the warm-up act before the main event. So I started making plans. Secret plans. The kind of plans that would change everything. Because if there's one thing us Americans are good at, it's reinventing ourselves when the situation calls for it. And boy, did the situation call for it. I knew I had to get out of there, but I also knew I had to be smart about it. My parents controlled the purse strings, and without their support, college would be nearly impossible to afford. So I started playing their game, but with my own rules. I began researching universities far from home. I'm talking cross-country far. Places where I could start fresh, where nobody knew me as John's older brother or the family disappointment. I spent hours in the school library, filling out applications, and writing essays about overcoming adversity. Funny thing is, I had plenty of material to work with. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents' neglect was actually giving me the perfect college essay topic. Sometimes life has a weird sense of humor like that. But I wasn't laughing yet. I was too focused on executing my escape plan. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a story that would completely flip my family's world upside down. So here's where my master plan started coming together, and let me tell you, it was more elaborate than anything they show in those Prison Break movies. I had to be careful, though, because one wrong move and my parents would shut down my college dreams faster than you can say family disappointment. The first step was playing along with their expectations. When graduation season rolled around and my dad started pressuring me about college choices, I knew exactly what to do. I sat them down at the kitchen table one evening, put on my best disappointed face, and told them I decided to go to the local community college. You should have seen their faces light up like Christmas morning. My mom actually clapped her hands together and said it was such a mature, financially responsible decision. My dad nodded approvingly and mentioned how this would save the money for John's future education. The irony was so thick I nearly choked on it, but I kept my poker face intact. This was all part of the plan. But here's the kicker. While they were celebrating their victory, I'd already been secretly accepted to 3 prestigious universities on the East Coast. Not only accepted, but I'd managed to land a full academic scholarship to one of them. We're talking about a school that cost $60,000 a year, and I was getting it for free based on my grades and that killer essay about overcoming family adversity. The scholarship committee had been so impressed with my story that they even offered me additional funding for living expenses. Apparently, my tale of being overlooked in favor of an underachieving sibling really struck a chord with them. Who knew that years of emotional neglect would actually pay off in the end? Now came the tricky part, executing the deception without getting caught. I told my parents I wanted to live in the dorms at the community college to get the full college experience. They were surprisingly cool with this, probably because it meant they wouldn't have to deal with me on a daily basis anymore. My dad even offered to help me move in, which was the first time he'd shown interest in helping me with anything college-related. I politely declined his help, saying I wanted to prove my independence. What I didn't tell them was that I'd already arranged for a friend to drive me to the airport instead. 3 days before the supposed community college move-in day, I packed my entire life into 2 suitcases and caught a red-eye flight to Boston. The feeling of that plane taking off was incredible. I'm sitting there in seat 23B, watching my hometown disappear below the clouds, knowing that my parents have absolutely no idea where I actually am. They think I'm settling into some dingy dorm room 20 minutes from home, when in reality I'm headed 3,000 miles away to start a completely new life. Setting up my real dorm room was like decorating my first apartment. My roommate was this cool guy from California named Marcus, who was studying computer science. When I told him about my situation, he couldn't believe it. Apparently, his family was a complete opposite, super supportive and proud of everything he did. It was weird being around someone who had what I'd always wanted. The best part about being so far away was that I could finally be myself without constantly being compared to John. My professors didn't know I had a brother. My classmates didn't know my family history. And for the first time in my life, I was judged purely on my own merits. It was intoxicating. Meanwhile, back home, my parents were living in blissful ignorance. They'd set up automatic monthly transfers to send me money for community college expenses. $800 a month, which was more financial support than they'd ever given me before. The irony was delicious. They were finally supporting my education, just not the education they thought they were supporting. I used their money to cover my meal plan and textbooks while my scholarship handled tuition and housing. Every month when that transfer hit my account, I'd think about how they probably felt so good about themselves for being supportive parents. If only they knew they were funding their least favorite son's escape to academic freedom. The communication strategy was crucial. I'd call them maybe once every 2 weeks, always making sure to sound stressed and overwhelmed by my community college classes. I'd complain about difficult professors and challenging assignments, which they ate up because it confirmed their belief that even community college was probably too ambitious for me. During these calls, they'd always ask if I was coming home for weekends or holidays. I'd make excuses about having too much studying to do or picking up extra shifts at my fictitious campus job. They seemed relieved, honestly. I think they preferred having me out of the house, so John could have all their attention without any distractions. 3 years passed like this. 3 beautiful, liberating years of actually enjoying education without family drama hanging over my head. I was thriving academically, made great friends, and even started dating this amazing girl named Sarah who was studying pre-med. Life was good, no, life was perfect, but I knew this perfect bubble couldn't last forever. Eventually, something would have to give. I just had no idea how spectacular the explosion would be when my carefully constructed house of cards finally came tumbling down. By my senior year, I was basically living in a completely different universe than the one my parents thought I inhabited. While they believe I was struggling through community college classes and working at some dead-end campus job, I was actually crushing it at one of the most competitive universities in the country. My GPA was sitting pretty at 3.9. I had already lined up a summer internship at a major tech company in Silicon Valley, and professors were starting to ask if I was interested in graduate school. It felt surreal, like I was living someone else's life. The kid who couldn't get recognition for academic achievement back home was now being courted by some of the biggest names in technology. The monthly money transfers from my parents had become this weird running joke between me and Marcus. Every time that $800 hit my account, he'd shake his head and mutter something about how my family had no idea they were funding a future tech mogul. We started calling it my ignorant scholarship, but honestly, I felt like I'd earned every penny of that money. After years of watching them throw cash at John's failed ventures and stupid mistakes, it felt like the universe was finally balancing the scales. They owed me this financial support, even if they didn't realize they were giving it to me. The internship that summer was a game changer. I'm talking about working for a company whose apps you probably have on your phone right now. The starting salary for their full-time positions was more than my dad made after 20 years at his accounting firm. When they offered me a job after graduation, I literally had to sit down to process it. Living in California for those 3 months was like getting a taste of what my real adult life could look like. No family drama, no golden child comparisons, just pure merit-based success. My co-workers had no idea about my complicated family situation, and it was refreshing to be known simply as Michael the talented programmer rather than Michael the disappointing older brother. Sarah came to visit me twice that summer, and we'd spend hours walking around San Francisco talking about our futures. She was applying to medical schools. I had this incredible job offer waiting for me, and everything felt possible. For the first time in my life, I could envision a future where I wasn't defined by my family's dysfunction. The funny thing is, during those 3 months in California, my parents called me exactly twice. Both times, they spent most of the conversation talking about John's latest adventures. Apparently, he decided to switch majors for the 3rd time and was now pursuing something in communications. They were so proud of his exploration of different interests. When I got back to campus for senior year, I was a different person. More confident, more focused, and completely clear about what I wanted. My professors noticed the change immediately. One of them even pulled me aside and asked if I was considering staying for a PhD program. The kid who was supposed to be struggling at community college was now being recruited for doctoral studies. The job offer was sitting on my desk like a golden ticket. 6 figures right out of college, full benefits, stock options, and relocation assistance to move back to California. I stared at that offer letter for hours, trying to wrap my head around how far I'd come from that kid who couldn't get his parents to care about his achievements. Meanwhile, the monthly financial support kept rolling in like clockwork. My parents had never missed a payment, never questioned where the money was going, never asked for receipts or proof of enrollment. Their neglect was finally working in my favor for once. I started thinking about what would happen after graduation. Obviously, I'd have to come clean about the deception eventually, but when? How? Part of me wanted to just disappear completely, move to California, and never look back. But another part of me, the part that had been seeking their approval for 23 years, wanted them to see what I'd accomplished despite their lack of support. Senior year flew by in a blur of final projects, job preparations, and celebrations with friends who had become more like family than my actual family ever was. These people knew the real me, supported my ambitions, and celebrated my successes without comparing me to anyone else. It was everything I had been missing at home. Graduation day was bittersweet. I walked across that stage to receive my degree in computer science, magna cum laude, and looked out at an audience full of proud families cheering for their graduates. My parents weren't there, of course. They thought I was still grinding away at community college with another year to go. That night, while my classmates celebrated with their families at fancy restaurants, I sat in my dorm room staring at my diploma and my job offer. I had everything I'd ever wanted academically and professionally, but there was still this hollow feeling in my chest. Success felt different when you had no one from your past to share it with. But then I remembered all those years of being ignored, dismissed, and overlooked. I thought about John getting praise for mediocrity while my achievements went unnoticed. That hollow feeling started transforming into something else, determination. I didn't need their validation anymore. I'd proven to myself that I could succeed without them. The transition to my new job was seamless. The company flew me out to California, helped me find an apartment, and welcomed me with open arms. Within my first month, I was already making more money than I'd ever seen in my life. The scared, overlooked kid from suburban America was now thriving in one of the most competitive industries in the world. But of course, good things never last forever. 3 months into my dream job, living my best life in a beautiful apartment overlooking the Bay Area, my phone rang. It was my dad, and something in his voice told me that my carefully constructed secret life was about to come crashing down around me. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was debugging code in my corner office overlooking downtown San Francisco. My dad's voice was unusually cheerful, almost giddy, which immediately put me on high alert. In my family, unexpected happiness usually meant someone was about to get steamrolled. He launched into this whole spiel about how proud he was of John, who had apparently gotten engaged to his college girlfriend. They were planning this big wedding for the following summer, and my dad wanted the whole family there to celebrate their golden boy's special day. The way he talked about it, you'd think John was marrying royalty instead of some girl he'd been dating for 8 months. Then came the part that made my blood boil. He started talking about how this wedding was going to be expensive and how they'd need me to chip in financially since I was family. Not asking, telling. Like it was my obligation to help pay for my brother's wedding after years of being treated like an afterthought. The audacity was breathtaking. But here's where it gets really interesting. When I politely declined to contribute money to the wedding, my dad's tone shifted completely. Gone was the fake cheerfulness, replaced by the cold authority I remembered from childhood. He told me I was being selfish and ungrateful, especially after everything they'd done to support me through college. That's when he played what he thought was his ace card. He threatened to stop sending me money and to pull me out of school if I didn't fall in line. I'm sitting there in my office, looking out at the San Francisco skyline, wearing a shirt that costs more than his monthly car payment, and this guy is threatening to ruin my education that he doesn't even know I already completed. I couldn't help it. I started laughing. Not just chuckling, but full-on belly laughing. The situation was so absurd that I couldn't contain myself. Here's my father, threatening to destroy a life that no longer existed, trying to control a son who had been financially independent for months. It was like watching someone threaten to cancel a TV show that had already ended. My laughter apparently infuriated him even more. He started yelling about respect and family obligations, demanding to know what was so funny about his threats. That's when I decided it was time to drop the bomb that would change everything. I told him he was welcome to try pulling me out of school, but it wouldn't accomplish what he thought it would. The confusion in his voice was palpable. He asked what I meant, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to process my response. So I explained very calmly that he couldn't pull me out of school I'd never attended in the first place. The silence that followed was deafening. When he finally found his voice again, he demanded to know what I was talking about. So I laid it all out for him. I explained how I'd been accepted to a prestigious university 3,000 miles away, how I'd received a full scholarship, how I'd been living and studying on the East Coast for 4 years, while they thought I was at community college 20 minutes from home. The sputtering and stammering that came to the phone was almost comical. He kept repeating the same questions over and over. How was this possible? How long had this been going on? Why didn't they know? I answered each question with clinical precision, watching his worldview crumble with every revelation. But the real kicker came when I told him I'd already graduated and been working at a major tech company for several months. When he asked about the money they'd been sending me, I explained that I'd been using it to supplement my living expenses while building my savings account. His precious monthly transfers had been funding the very deception that had allowed me to escape their control. The explosion that followed was spectacular. He started screaming about betrayal and deception, demanding to know how I could lie to them for so long. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had ignored my achievements for decades was now furious that I'd achieved something without his knowledge or approval. Then came the threats about cutting off contact, disowning me, and making sure I'd never be welcome in their house again. I listened calmly to his rant, occasionally glancing out my office window at the beautiful California afternoon, and realized that his threats held no power over me anymore. I was financially independent, emotionally stable, and surrounded by people who actually valued me. When he finally ran out of steam, I delivered the final blow. I told him exactly how much money I was making, which was significantly more than his annual salary. I mentioned my stock options, my benefits package, and my promotion prospects. The kid he'd written off as a mediocre student was now out-earning him by a substantial margin. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't confusion or anger. This was the sound of someone's entire belief system collapsing. For years, they'd operated under the assumption that John was a successful one and I was the disappointment. Now, they were learning that their disappointment had quietly become more successful than anyone in the family. He tried to regain some control by demanding that I come home immediately to explain myself in person. When I declined, citing work commitments and the fact that I had no desire to subject myself to their drama, he went into full authoritarian mode. He started making demands about family loyalty and respect, as if those concepts hadn't been absent from my childhood. That's when I decided to end the conversation on my terms. I told him that I'd spent 23 years trying to earn their approval and respect, only to watch them lavish both on someone who'd never earned either. I explained that I'd built a successful life without their help or recognition, and I wasn't about to let them tear it down now. Before hanging up, I made it clear that if they wanted any relationship with me moving forward, it would have to be on equal terms. No more golden child favoritism, no more taking me for granted, and definitely no more attempts to control my life from 3,000 miles away. The ball was in their court, but I was done playing by their rules. As I ended the call and set my phone down, I felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. The secret was out, the deception was over, and now I'd get to see what my family was really made of. Something told me I was about to find out just how much my success had changed the family dynamics, and not in the way they'd expected. The aftermath of that phone call was like watching a slow-motion car crash that I couldn't look away from. For about 2 weeks, I heard absolutely nothing from my family. No angry follow-up calls, no demanding voicemails, no guilt-trip text messages. Just complete radio silence, which honestly was more unsettling than their usual drama. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but instead of the confrontation I expected, what happened next was something I never could have predicted. My mom called me from a number I didn't recognize, and within 30 seconds of answering, I could tell she was crying. Not just upset crying, but that ugly, desperate sobbing that comes from complete despair. Through her tears, she managed to explain that the family was in serious financial trouble. Apparently, John had convinced them to invest their entire retirement savings into some cryptocurrency venture that he swore was going to make them all rich. We're talking about their life savings here. 40 years of careful planning and saving gone in a matter of months. The details were even worse than I initially thought. John hadn't just lost their retirement money. He convinced them to take out a second mortgage on their house to invest even more. When the whole thing collapsed, they found themselves facing foreclosure on a home they'd lived in for 25 years. Their golden boy had essentially gambled away their entire future. But here's the kicker. Instead of supporting John through this catastrophic failure, like they always had before, my parents had completely turned on him. The same people who used to make excuses for his every mistake were now treating him like he was radioactive. Mom told me they'd barely spoken to him in weeks, and when they did, it usually ended in screaming matches about how he'd ruined their lives. The irony was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. After decades of John being able to do no wrong, one massive screw-up had completely flipped the family dynamic. Suddenly, their disappointment son was looking pretty good compared to their golden child, who had bankrupted them in their retirement years. But the real surprise came about a month later, when all three of them showed up at my apartment building in San Francisco. I'm still not entirely sure how they found my address, but there they were, standing in my lobby looking like refugees from their former life. The visual was surreal. My parents looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen them, and John looking like a scared kid who'd finally run out of ways to charm his way out of trouble. They'd driven cross-country to find me, which must have been the most uncomfortable road trip in family history. The apartment complex doorman called up to ask if I was expecting visitors, and when he described them, I knew exactly who it was. Part of me wanted to tell him I wasn't available, but curiosity got the better of me. When they made it up to my floor, the looks on their faces as they took in my apartment were priceless. This wasn't some college student's cramped studio. This was a beautiful 2-bedroom place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that real estate agents dream about. The monthly rent probably cost more than their old house payment. My dad, who had been so quick to threaten and demand during our phone conversation, was suddenly meek and apologetic. He started with this awkward speech about family and forgiveness, clearly rehearsed but delivered with none of his usual authority. It was weird seeing him so deflated after years of him being this intimidating figure in my life. Mom jumped straight to the begging. She talked about how they were about to lose the house, how they had nowhere else to turn, how I was their only hope for avoiding complete financial ruin. The woman who had ignored my achievements for 23 years was now asking me to save her from the consequences of favoring my brother. But John's performance was the most pathetic of all. Gone was the cocky, entitled attitude that had defined him since childhood. Instead, he was practically in tears, talking about how sorry he was and how much he missed his big brother. It was manipulative and desperate, and frankly disgusting to watch someone who had never shown me an ounce of genuine affection suddenly trying to play the loving sibling card. They laid out their entire sob story. The foreclosure timeline, their ruined credit, their complete lack of savings, their desperate need for someone to bail them out. And then came the ask. They wanted me to loan them enough money to save the house and get back on their feet. We're talking about a 6-figure sum that would have wiped out most of my savings. I listened to the entire pitch without saying a word, just watching these three people who had made my childhood miserable now groveling for my help. The kid they'd written off as mediocre was now their only lifeline, and the poetic justice of it all wasn't lost on me. When they finished their presentation, I looked around at my beautiful apartment, thought about my successful career, my financial independence, and my bright future. Then I looked at them, desperate, broken, and finally understanding what it felt like to need something from someone who had no obligation to help them. My response was simple and final. I told them that I'd spent my entire childhood watching them pour their resources, attention, and support into John while treating me like an afterthought. I explained that I'd built my success without their help, their encouragement, or their belief in me. And now that they needed something from me, they expected family loyalty that they'd never shown me. I stood up, walked to my door, and opened it. I told them that their financial crisis was a natural consequence of their poor judgment and favoritism, and that I wouldn't be enabling their dysfunction anymore. John started protests, talking about family and second chances, but I cut him off. I looked directly at him and said that he'd had decades of second chances, third chances, and endless opportunities that were never extended to me. Their golden child had finally revealed his true worth. It wasn't my job to clean up the mess he'd made of their lives. As they reluctantly filed out of my apartment, my mom made one last desperate attempt to guilt me into helping them. She talked about how disappointed she was in the man I'd become, how money had changed me, and how families should stick together through difficult times. I almost laughed at the audacity. After years of ignoring me, dismissing my achievements, and favoring my brother in every situation, she was disappointed in me for not bailing them out of their self-created crisis. The lack of self-awareness was stunning. I closed the door behind them and haven't spoken to any of them since. That was 8 months ago, and my life has been peaceful in a way I never thought possible. No family drama, no guilt trips, no being compared to someone else's accomplishments or failures. Just me, my career, my girlfriend Sarah, who moved to California after finishing medical school, and a future that's entirely my own. Sometimes I wonder what happened to them after that day. Did they lose the house? Did they find another way out of their financial hole? Did John finally face real consequences for his actions? But those thoughts pass quickly because I've realized something important. Their problems are no longer my problems. I became my own golden child, and that's the only approval I need anymore. The scared, overlooked kid who desperately wanted his family's recognition has grown into a successful adult who doesn't need their validation to feel worthy. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, without the people who never believed you could. Thanks for listening to my story. I know it's pretty intense, and I'm curious what you think about the whole situation. Did I do the right thing by cutting them off? Should family loyalty override years of mistreatment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, or if you've dealt with similar family dynamics, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more real-life stories. Your support means everything and helps me keep sharing these experiences with all of you.